Hello, welcome back to the Tears of Fire podcast where I go over the Last Dragon Chronicles by Chris DeLacy. Today we'll be going over the chapters 37 through 40 of Firestar. Thank you for joining me. I hope your flight in was safe and you hit no turbulence. Let's get into the episode. We left off last week with David meeting Bergstrom at the college and having a little meeting, them going back and forth on what the plan would be for David. We pick back up instantly with Bergstrom saying that David might need to help him kill Gawain and what that might look like. They're having this conversation going back and forth. David is not on board whatsoever. He doesn't like the thought of taking Gawain out completely, and he's not sure what Liz will think herself since she's, obviously connected to the dragons. As this conversation goes on, Bergstrom explains that the dragon cannot be peacefully at rest unless all parts of himself are returned. He said he thought that he was able to track them down in the past, but was unable to find about two. One has been recovered by Lucy from the cave, where she found the isosceles and the lock of hair, which he then relays that to David as well. But he informs David that there's one more still shrouded by a power that even he cannot pierce. So this brings up a question on, how powerful is this thing? My first thought was immediately this new other universe that we've been kind of dipping our toes into with the dark matter and with the Fain. So do they have somehow they're able to keep this piece of Gawain for this long? What I'm not sure about is, to me, it sounded like this portal between the Fain world and our world, even back in the ancient times when they were starting to come over, only interacted every couple thousand, maybe even couple million years in between. So my questioning was, was there even a portal open at that point, or some other mode of transportation to get a part of Gawain from our world to the Fain's world for that to be possible? At this point, I'm just throwing out theories. We're kind of far enough into the series where I don't really remember anything, really. I remember one big event that goes down kind of more middle-ish of the series. But other than that, for surely, I don't remember the minutia. So everything from this on out is pretty much going to be first time reacting. So if you guys have any theories, throw them out. You guys know the email. It's thelastdm@gmail.com. Love to hear what you guys think. Bergstrom then goes on to explain that Lucy is safe. She's back on the island of Ragnar's Tooth and is in a hibernation mode, which I kind of assumed that Lucy would be sleeping, that she was just knocked out for a little bit and would wake up and just spend time with the bear in the cave. But it sounds like they're actually just passed out. They're just going to be sleeping for months and months and months and months and months. Well, it sounds like it's going to be about 3 months because they tell them to have a good Christmas and that the due date for this new world is going to be Valentine's Day, February 14th. Bergstrom tells David that his stories are true, that he has the power that's guided by the Fain as well. David's people, or that David and people like him seem to be evolving in that direction, helping these people harness abilities that they had no idea what they were, saying that David has raw talent and that his powers are growing fast. Bergstrom reminds David that because of him writing his stories, Ingvar has a lot to do with this and will be an integral part going forward, saying that Ingvar has the Tooth of Ragnar in him, and at this current moment there are bears all over the ice uniting for this bloodline and marching towards the Tooth itself. Which that's going to be a crazy scene to see. I can only picture it as a movie or a TV show where they get those huge craning shots or a shot with a drone and they just have hundreds of bears marching in the same direction, which most of the time, if you know about polar bears, they're very isolated animals. I mean, obviously being up north, but what I mean by that is they're they're not in big groups. There'll be a mom with a couple of cubs, but even then, there's some of the more they're on the harsh side of nature to where if there's no food, they're not opposed to eating their own kind. And, a male will easily kill one of the cubs in order just to mate with the female. Or again, if they're starving, no seals, no anything, they have no problem just taking out the cubs. So, for there to be this many bears with a common interest, same goal going, or same goal orienting them into a certain path and what seems to be an inevitable fight with a dragon, I would like to see how many bears it takes, because ultimately, I mean, how do you fuck with a dragon? Dragon's going to be able to fly, breathe air, and I would think be able to take out a hefty number before it just gets exhausted and then has to land. But then at that point, can it not just fly away to where it's going to take too long for the bears to get there? I don't know. To me, it seems pretty questionable on if a bear could take out a dragon and how many it would be. That's just what I'm picturing if it's going to come to a big old fight. But, what do you call a mass migration of bears coming towards a central spot? Towards the end of this talk with David, though, Bergstrom brings out the missing tools for Gadzooks. He brings out the pencil, the pad, and he introduces David to Groin, the dragon that turns into his talisman and can turn invisible as well, doing his little bidding. He tells David that not everything was planned by him and Groin, that once he got to the Penny Kettle's house and he let the potions dragon free, everything after that was all up to chance. He had no idea Greth would inhale the fiery flower, and no idea that he would then be transported and then communicate with, well, they haven't been saying communicating, they're saying commingling, so I'm guessing that's some form of, interlacing at least your consciousness is what it seems to be for now, together with the Fain beings. Bergstrom also returns David's story to him on a floppy disk. He had had a copy of it in his office the whole time while David was writing, which is smart, makes sense. You kind of had a feeling that this story would return in some way, shape, or form. And now we know that David has the ability to shape the future. Recently we were told that it might have been only by a couple of seconds, and now he's a few days ahead. So with his growing strength, and if he just continues to practice, I am sure he can, get months ahead by the time the dragon comes, and hopefully he can just write the end of the dragon to be a peaceful one. We'll see later in the section that might not be quite as possible as we'd hope. As David is heading out of the door, he's scanning the books on the shelves, and one brings a little attention to his eye. It's a book about polar bears with the name Lono, which was the female that he had named earlier in his own story. This makes David wonder, turn around to Bergstrom, and he asks, "Who are you?" Bergstrom gets kind of a wonderful look in his eye and says, "I am all things to all men," which kind of threw me through a loop, because if this is supposed to be the same person that Lucy saw and they're all Gaia, I was under the impression that Bergstrom was being used as a messenger, almost like Moses, as is to God, is what Bergstrom is to Gaia. But it seems as though they're one and the same person. At least that's what I got from this statement right here. I am all things to all men. Unless Gaia is just a spirit that is going around possessing all of these people and speaking through them. But I highly doubt that. This seems to be a peaceful being that just wants to put things right. And Bergstrom has been continuously saying that in order for bears and humanity as we know it to continue to live as we have been, we can't have the return of dragons, because they'll just destroy the ice caps. That's going to bring us to the end of that chapter. So now we're going to get into chapter 38, Awakening. David gets home and he's found the door unlocked. It's kind of quiet, but once he gets into the kitchen, he finds Liz just sobbing at the table with Mr. Bacon sitting right there, kind of consoling her. David thinks it has something to do with Lucy. Bacon kind of shrugs this off and says no, it's about Bonington. They've been to the vet. Liz gives David a quick update saying that Bonington has a lump under his tongue, and that's why he's been drooling and pushing his food around. It's because he's just not able to eat, and that it's cancer. Liz says that there wasn't really a time frame set for Bonington, just that they're going to want to see him after Christmas. And this upsets David for Liz, saying that this has got to be a pretty tough Christmas without her child and now Bonington on the fritz. And soon after that, Bacon decides to leave. He gets up, gathers his things, and goes outside. David notices that there's no dragons around, and he can hear a faint thumping / chanting coming from the dragon's den. So he heads up, not knowing that Liz is right behind him, and when he gets in there, he finds all of the special penny kettle dragons sitting on Liz's workbench in a circle. In the center of them is Grockle laying there, and again, they're all kind of humming / chanting, and Golly Gosh is messing around with some of the saliva that Bonington had given them. After what goes on for a couple of minutes, their dragon's eyes start to open and beams of light come through. In the center of them, it creates this violet cone, as it was described, and then a vision of a dragon on top of Grockle and the cone. Once Bonington's saliva had been fully absorbed into Grockle, Grockle wakes up. The dragons, all the penny kettle dragons, blow fire onto him with a red smoke, it says. It's absorbed in through his nostrils, and David gets scared. He's starting to call for Liz, but Liz kind of surprised him, saying that she's right there next to him. And what they weren't paying attention to is that the window was wide open. Grockle takes one look at it. David looks at Grockle, acknowledges what's going on, and starts lunging at the window, but he's just not quite as fast. He's not quite fast enough. When he lunges and he closes the windows, it snaps down and catches Grockle's wing under, kind of pinning him. But from what I imagined of this, Grockle got about 85% of the way out. It's just his wing. The rest of his body is completely out of the door. And since this window is still creaked slightly through, Grockle snaps his tail over at David, just trying to get him to let him go. This actually gets David pretty bad. He slits his wrist, and David starts bleeding all over, and he has to hold on to his arm to stop the bleeding, letting the dragon go out into the wild. This scares David. He turns around over to Liz, and he just asks what this means, that humans are not used to seeing dragons, and that a dragon is at large. That was a pretty fun read. That was a short chapter for Awakening, but it kind of gave me mid-finale vibes. If this was a TV show or a movie. And I know I say that a lot. I'm going to go on a quick tangent. When I was young and I was first reading these books, I remember very vividly emailing the author, or who I thought was the author. It might have been his press team, or maybe the publishers, or, maybe it's just some random place that my mom helped me email. But I wrote out an email saying that I love these books and I hope they one day become movies and shows, because at that time they were working on Aragon, and that was one of my favorite books as well. When the movie came out, I was ecstatic. And at the time I was too young to really know what I meant or knew what an adaptation was. And so I wasn't too put down by the Aragon movie and was excited for the other ones. And I got a response from, who I thought was Crystal Lacey at the time, and I'm choosing to still believe it is. So I'm just going to say that I got an email from the author back, or his press team, saying that they hope one day that this will come true too. So I'm kind of just trying to speak it into existence. Maybe one day we'll get Disney or DreamWorks or somebody that has a little animation film. Even if it is just animation, I think this is a great story. It'd be awesome. It starts out easy. The first 2 books are for younger children and grows as it gets older. So you get kind of a slightly Harry Potter vibe with you growing up with these characters. But yeah, so I apologize if I say that a lot and it gets annoying, but you got to work towards your goals. If you guys have any books or stories that you'd like to see a short made on, or a movie or a TV show, give me some recommendations. Would love it, dude. Okay, and that's going to bring us into chapter 39. Graith explains. After David gets bandaged up, he gathers up the four dragons that seem to be the masterminds of this plan, lines them up on the counter in the kitchen with Liz to interrogate them. There's Golly, Gretel, Graith, and Gadzooks. After a little bit of grilling back and forth, the dragons are not talking to David whatsoever or supplying any answers. Instead, Golly looks over to Liz after Liz asks him about Bonington. Golly says that it's the cancer, and because of the ice fire making Bonington's metabolism drive overtime, it's producing cancer cells faster than Bonington can fight them. Liz says that she understands, but among this, he's just spouting out information saying that the Fain are behind the revival of Grockle. As Golly is talking to Liz, Dave can pick up strings of the conversation here and there, but he can tell that it's not a straight line conversation. Golly's kind of confused, flustered, not sure what to do. David's asking questions about Grockle. What is he going to eat? How is he going to hide? Where is he going to sleep? All those types of questions. Liz tells him not to worry and that dragons are smart. He'll adapt and find a way. Then David asks about when he starts to grow, when it becomes too hard to hide or anything of that sort, and Liz becomes quiet. The Fain are brought up by Golly. David learns that all four of them have commingled. More than likely, all of the special dragons in the Penny Kettle House have commingled with this Fain. And David questions what the Fain's purpose really is being here, what its goal is, what it wants to do. And Graith steps up then saying that the Fain only wants to go home after all of this is done, that he's tired and he needs to rest after doing this thing for Grockle. So it makes sense that these Fains that have been almost romanticizing the dragons here on Earth, once there's the opportunity to have the first real one in almost 1,000 years, the Fain just hopped on that chance. I'm sure that the energy and magic the dragon brings will only entice more powerful beings, if there are going to be more, to come back to this universe and bring almost the old ways about. Liz gets kind of white, and as soon as this was brought up without having to from Bergstrom, he kind of just spills all of the beans for Liz, telling her what the Fain are, what Bergstrom had kind of told him. They're pre-human, and they just, they fantasize about the dragons a lot. He also tells Liz that Lucy is safe and that she's in hibernation mode with a polar bear as well. I'm not sure if that made Liz feel good or not, because it says that Liz turned the same color as the bear itself, just stark white. David is wondering why Liz is being so nonchalant about things, saying that she needs to worry more and that this dragon is her son. She needs to be doing something. Liz takes a second and says that might not be completely true and that this dragon might claim Xana, which was my first thought when we were reading that as well, especially when my buddy Colin was on. Go back and listen to those episodes if you haven't had the chance. But he said the same thing, that since Xana's the one that quickened the egg, wouldn't she be the mother? Kind of confused us on that part, but I would believe so. David gets worried, takes a look around, and says that he needs to get working on things as well, and that if he's going to do his part, he needs to start writing. He takes out the tools returned from Bergstrom and gives them to Zuki. His notepad and his pencil. Gadzooks was pretty disheartened to see that the pencil was broken, but Golly wasted no time finding a pencil sharpener in his tool belt, getting a new tip on there, and as soon as that's completed, Gadzooks starts fiercely writing as if there had been novels stored in his head that he hasn't been able to get out. The first message that's gone through and perceived by David as he's picturing it in his mind just says the name Arthur. When David speaks this out loud, he takes one look at Liz, she registers it, and completely faints again. Now, before we get into the next chapter, that brings us to the end of that one, but my first thought was, is this King Arthur? Because we have Guinevere, we have the story of the last dragon. Is this going to be King Arthur of the Round Table? I was getting pretty excited, but I wasn't sure how we were going to turn this into that whole story without having to take, like a time traveler's loop and then spending, I would want almost an entire book just to see how all of these storylines intertwined. Because to have Guinevere without Arthur felt weird. Up until this point, there's been no mention of him, so I'd kind of gotten used to it. Okay, there is no King Arthur. This is just a new little twist where Guinevere was her own power, just struggled between the might of the Sibyl. But here it is. That was at least my first thought. So we'll see how that goes into chapter 40. Chapter 40, Life Before Lucy. We open up this chapter with Liz starting to wake up. David is right there by her bedside, pretty much chastising her, telling her, you need to lay down. Liz doesn't want to. She's worried about what's going on. She's kind of freaked out. She asks how long she's been out for. David said, it's only been 40 minutes, but you took a nasty spill and bumped her head. She's got a gnarly goose egg sitting there. And so he's keeping her on the bed, telling her that she needs to rest and lay down and that he'll take care of things for now. But as they're talking, Liz can look into his eyes and see that there's something just burning behind them. He needs some information. There's a question that's just blocking all other thoughts from his brain. And she tells him to ask him. David is hesitant, and he said, listen, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't for Gadzooks writing it, but I need to know, who is Arthur? And that made me excited because I didn't think we were going to get this kind of confirmation or story, at least for another book or so. That's how I would have dragged it on, little breadcrumbs here and there. But Liz gets pretty upset and just starts crying. Gwilyn wants to come over and console his lady, but David tells him to hold off for a second because in his experience, he's learned that it's better to sometimes have that cry and get it out, which I think everybody can relate to. I think everybody holds it back sometimes a little too much, but once you finally have that release, afterwards you're extremely tired, you just need to lay down, but you normally feel a little bit better afterwards. Helps you think. But so it comes to exactly that after Liz has gotten her, has gotten the tears out and is feeling a little bit better, she makes David swear that she's not going to tell anyone, not even Lucy, that even the dragons haven't heard this entire story. She instructs the guard dragon Gwilyn to turn around and go to sleep so that he doesn't hear, and he faithfully performs his duties, takes a quick little nap. Liz explains that she had been living with Gulana on and off for years, going back to different locations with her while she was on her training, but eventually grew to want to have a family and have some independence. So she ran away from Gulana, and she believed that Gulana wasn't ever going to find her. And she thought that she went on to explain how naive that thought was. One day she was up in Cambridge. She wasn't going for school. She just loved the greeny area, the grassy areas of that part of the country. She said she was on a beach and she had a flat tire. She had accidentally parked on some broken glass bottles. And out of nowhere, this taller guy with dark-featured hairs and a slender body pulls up with a car jack and helps her replace her tire. Liz goes on to confirm that this was Arthur. He was a sweet man, very intellectual. He was going to college up there. She said that he was the first one that she had been able to connect with because he was able to have an intellectual conversation on dragons. He's from a village in the Welsh where their flag was a red dragon on top of mountains, and they believed. So they'd go back and forth sharing their own myths on dragons, and he would sometimes even Explain how dragons could breathe fire if they were real. He was a scientist that studied the stars. That stuck with David hard and said he's an astronomer, right? Liz gets kind of quiet and says, yeah. Is that of some help to us? David takes a second to think and says it might be. Liz goes on to continue the story, saying that she believed everything was perfect for quite a few months, and then out of nowhere, right before things turned bad, is when Gulana returned. And that brings us to the end of chapter 40. It's nice to see some mention of Lucy's dad. I knew there had to be some of something, because even, in book 2, when it's very interesting that there's a mention of this Arthur now, saying that she might be connected to Lucy and being his father, especially with book 2 and how far we had come with the quickened egg, and this is how all penny kettles were born, is through magic and mud. Not magic and mud, just magic and clay. And that I thought there had to at least be a guy that they modeled it after, since there's no real reproductive process between males and females in the penny kettle, lineage, that maybe if once they met a guy, they could somehow transfer some of his alma into the kid as well and do it in a magical sense. So I'm still kind of getting that vibe here that maybe Liz was so disheartened from losing this guy that she wanted to have his kid one day, and eventually, molded Lucy and then needed Gulana in order to do that. Or maybe that's what caused it. Maybe just like how Xana came and quickened an egg on accident, Liz didn't know, and she was just making eggs. She was in a very maternal place in her emotions and in her mind, being with this Arthur guy, thinking that they might spend some time together and grow together, and accidentally quickening an egg, since she's just started doing her clay dragons as well. And once an egg is quickened, that's when Gulana shows up. So, bada bing, bada boom, thing one, thing two. That's what I got from it. I'm not sure which of those 3 directions it would be, but it wouldn't be too far of a stretch for any of them in my eyes. But that brings us to the end of this section. Thank you guys so much for coming along. Join us next week, where we're going to be going through chapters 41 through 44. And yeah, I hope you guys have a safe flight out and hit no turbulence.